There are two particular provisions that were inserted into the companion piece that's quite larger at $3.5 trillion. They don't raise a lot of revenue, but they affect self-directed IRAs specifically, that essentially will prohibit individuals from using their IRA accounts to make any type of an investment that would require kind of like an accreditation process.
This episode brought to you by Suites at Madison. Meeting and conference rooms for rent by the hour, week, month, or year. Suites at Madison, where business gets done. Check them out at www.downtowntampaoffice.com. Now, on to the show.
You are listening to the Invest Florida Real Estate Show, covering topics in lending, buy and sell strategies, property management, hot markets, and tips and tools to guide you along the way on your path to real estate success. You want Florida investment real estate talk? You have come to the right place. And now, our hosts, Eric Odum and Steven Silverman.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Invest Florida Real Estate Show. This is your co-host, Eric Odum, along with Steven Silverman. Steven, sound like a broken record, but the market continues on a torrid pace in the state of Florida.
There's just a lot of activity. There's a lot of buyers out there, and sellers are taking advantage. And at the same time, there's confusion because some of this is all being generated by impending legislation, and depending on what people think is going to occur, they're adjusting their investment strategy.
You know, every time we have a turnover in D.C., especially every couple of years, that new party that's in control wants to change things up, and we try to keep you guys posted on it because it can be something that affects you as real estate investors, and so that's one of these things that literally I just found by reading LinkedIn or Facebook, and I had no idea it was hidden in this tax bill we've got coming. But we're going to do a really quick episode. It's going to be a quick hitter on what's happening there, and hopefully it will provide some shine a little light on exactly what's happening and why it's happening, and what you guys perhaps can do about it to change the course. Steven, we love people leaving reviews for us, and I'm sad we didn't have one from the last episode.
We didn't have one?
No.
You know what, Eric? That was probably one of those episodes where you spoke a lot.
And people turned it off before they left the
review. maybe you were singing, I don't know. But guys, we really need those reviews because reviews are what interests guests to come on the show, and we all learn from them. So help us keep the quality up. Please give us reviews wherever you can, whenever you can, and help keep the momentum going. We have a lot of people listening to the show now, and it's important to keep getting good guests.
Yeah, we noticed that Google Play eliminated the reviews for podcast some time ago. The place is Apple is obviously still the dominant player in the podcast market, but the method that you're using for listening, like Stitcher, for example, also Chartable has a place to review. And even if you just left a message on our Facebook page, all those things are helpful because our guests, we have to recruit, we have to try to convince potential guests that spending time with us, investing time with us is worthwhile. And when they see our listeners responding to us, it helps them feel better about the time that they're committing to us. So if you've not done so already, really appreciate you just going and leaving us a little quick review, whether it be on our website or a Facebook page or iTunes or whatever. It doesn't really matter to us. It just it does help. It helps us when we're trying to get guests on the show. Steven, we're talking tax, and we're talking politics a little bit today because it's important for investors. Is there anything else that you want to discuss from a housekeeping standpoint before we roll into our guest?
Well, it's getting towards the end of the year. There's a lot of changes happening, so pay attention. Everyone's talking about the big things. There's some small things to be careful of also. So we'll roll right into it and we'll learn something. Today we have with us Scott Maurer. Scott is the Director of Business Development at Advanta IRA. Scott is a returning guest. He's been on the show before on the podcast, and he's also attended our workshops and given lectures advising people on how to invest in real estate with your IRA. So, Scott, welcome back to the Invest Florida show.
Thanks, Steve and Eric. It's a pleasure to be back on with you both.
We really appreciate your time. when there's events that are occurring, we try to be timely about updating our listeners. And obviously, there's some changes that are going on right now. We have an infrastructure bill that there was a bipartisan agreement, then that bipartisan agreement was thrown out, it was rewritten, and now you've got some changes that might affect your world. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Scott?
People are probably familiar with listening and watching the news that as you mentioned, there's a bipartisan infrastructure bill of I think a little over $1 trillion that is looking to pass the House, but there's a companion piece that's quite larger at $3.5 trillion with other programs. There's some little known provisions in there. I mean, a lot of the talk regarding that bill is around the corporate tax rate and raising the tax rates of individual high earners and things of that nature. But there are two particular provisions that were inserted into the bill. They don't raise a lot of revenue, but they affect self-directed IRAs specifically. If anyone's looking at a bill or looking at what's being proposed, it's Section 138312 and 138314. That essentially will prohibit individuals from using their IRA accounts to make any type of an investment that would require, a kind of like an accreditation process. So a lot of private placements rely on people, verifying their income or their educational status to be part of an investment. And this particular provision is saying no more for any IRA investor. Even if you're an accredited investor, you cannot use your IRA, you cannot use your 401k to invest in these private placements.
And just to be clear, when you said this is in the second $3.5 trillion package, not the first one.
Correct. So there's one bill that has, like I said, I think bipartisan support to pass, but it's being part of some of the people voting on it are conditioning their approval of that bill on also trying to pass this larger $3.5 trillion bill. That there are other people certainly objecting to it. So I think the conventional wisdom, at least my thoughts on it too, are that something will pass. It's a matter of what and what's going to be in those bills that pass. I don't think we're going to see a price tag as large as what they're talking about. So it's really something to follow here in the next few weeks as this develops. So it's going on in Capitol Hill as we speak.
Primarily, what people were putting in their IRAs were more of those like mortgage private placements, right? Because you could run into some issues with unrelated business taxable income if you're doing, like, say, a tenant in common or something like that. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, you can. I mean, there's people who invest. I mean, there's people who use self-directed IRAs to buy rental properties in their neighborhood or down the street, and those investments will be largely unaffected, at least by this piece of legislation. People make loans out of their IRAs, on a peer-to-peer basis that also would be likely to be unaffected by this bill. But yeah, we're talking about situations where it's a private placement structure where it could be a mortgage fund, it could be a multifamily syndication. Yeah, even though the UBIT tax may apply, the investment is still valid to hold, and a lot of our clients do still hold those investments in their account. We're also talking about startup companies, innovative startup companies that raise capital from friends and family and acquaintances to help get their startup off the ground. Those investments would all come to a halt for people wanting to use their IRAs in order to make the investment. And I think part of the genesis of this larger infrastructure bill is there's a lot of provisions in there to go after, so to speak, some of the wealthy or the uber wealthy in the country. But our experience in our clients who self-direct, they're not millionaires, they're not billionaires, they're average folks who have saved over the years. They've been diligent about their savings, they've reached an accredited level, investor level, and just a lot of the funds they have to invest are in those IRAs and 401ks. So there's some people on the other side of this issue saying, well, it's not preventing people from investing. But it is, practically speaking, because that's where their money is located. They have to take advantage of the investments is in the IRAs and it's in the 401k plans. Yeah,
and I really appreciate you coming on to talk about this because I've seen a lot of chatter online about, oh my gosh, it's going to affect all accredited investors and they're not going to be able to put it into IRAs and that's all going to go to the wayside. Of course, what you're saying is not true. Partially true is what I should say, but it's not inconsequential either. And folks that might put together, raise a little money and do let's say, hard money lending, and they did a little small fund for friends and family, and then that individual is running that fund and then going out and lending it to the home flippers in the neighborhood or in the community, there's a good chance that that deal is going to be pretty seriously affected by it. And I know a number of those guys that are in our community that do those small syndications and raise some funds and then turn around and lend it back out into the community. So those are the ones that are really, in terms of real estate, the ones that are going to get hit the worst. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. Absolutely. It's people, say, like I said, the uber wealthy or the wealthy and the much larger, let's, say the much larger investment funds are going to be able to find replacement investors and replacement capital. They're going to be largely unaffected. It's like I said, the startups, it's the smaller businesses that don't just have access to an infinite amount of capital. And so, whether they're talking to someone who's using their savings account or they're using their IRA, that's their investor. And those people, if this bill were to pass, this provision in the bill passes, it's going to force that person who's raising the capital, who's running that fund, to either find a replacement investor, or the client themselves is going to be forced to get rid of the investment. That's another little provision in the bill. Anyone who currently has these investments will be required to divest within 2 years. So they either have to sell their investment to somebody else, and certainly with these illiquid private placements, they may be selling at a discount, which results in a loss in their IRA, or they're going to have to just distribute it from the account, which is going to cause them a tax burden. So again, some of the larger funds may be able to have additional capital laying around to pay off the investors and not cause a loss. But it's the smaller guys, it's the people in the local community that they don't just have access to. If you have an investor who's got $100,000 with them from an IRA, to simply stroke a check for $100,000, without having some tough nights and some really having to find the money. And if they can't, ultimately the burden falls to that IRA owner.
There's been a lot of chatter about what's going to go down. And, most of what people are talking about is what's going to happen with capital gains and 1031 exchanges. I haven't seen a lot of conversation really about the IRAs at all. So this is all interesting. All the minutia it's not minutia. It's going to affect a lot of people.
Yeah. What's interesting is they make these changes from the ivory tower in DC, not understanding how it's going to affect boots on the ground. I started my career back I'm going to date myself. Stephen was already partially retired when I was finishing school, but in 1988 I started at the beginning of what was the effects of the 1986 Tax Reform Act, which essentially made the limited partnerships in real estate not feasible, not viable anymore. And what came out of that was it roiled the markets, because these illiquid investments ended up getting dumped onto the market. And then you had the savings and loan crisis, which, one thing led to another. And then for the next essentially 7 years, we were with a shovel trying to dig ourselves out of that mess. So these changes happen and people think they're not consequential. And then all of a sudden, like, whoa, I didn't know how many of those things. And all of a sudden you got, people left holding the bag on this. I'm not trying to equate what happened with the 86 Reform Act with what's going on here, but still it will be have an effect a chilling effect on folks that are particularly small syndicators that are using IRA money to fund their deals.
Frankly, it's quite scary because it's really like the government mandating, and some people are going to lose money. I would have expected that maybe these investors would have been grandfathered in, but to be mandated to divest within a certain period of time, it's a recipe to lose money, really, for those investors.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, you hit the nail on the head, Stephen. You're saying that a lot of the debate is on the corporate tax rates and things of that, and that's what's getting the headlines. And this provision is in there. Now, the interesting thing alongside these, what we call kind of the self-directed provisions, that's, I think, scheduled to it would raise all of $1.8 billion of a $3.5 trillion bill. There are provisions as well that would start capping the value, the amount of money you could have in a retirement account at 10 or 20 million, which is meant to address what they call the Peter Thiel problem, which is Peter Thiel is the founder of PayPal. And he famously or infamously took $2,000 in a Roth IRA account and turned it into $5 billion by buying the initial shares of PayPal through the Roth. And there's a lot of people upset about that. It's kind of an abuse of the system, and they're probably right on that. And that certainly is something to be addressed, and that's something that is addressed in the bill. And I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I don't really have a problem with putting some limitations so people don't abuse the process. But the people we're talking about, our clients, are retired teachers, firefighters, just individuals who were diligent about saving money, have reached the accredited investor status and want to invest in their local communities and into startups and into little private real estate deals to help beautify the community, innovate, start, create jobs. And these are, like I said, these are the people that are going to be affected, the unintended consequences of what they're doing. So
what's going to be the timeline? I know we're in the middle of these debates right now, and it's contentious. And so let's say that, and it's still somewhat doubtful that this thing's going to make it through both houses. I mean, you're going to end up with the usual suspects that are registered as Democrats, but not really, voting against it, and probably is going to die a death in the Senate. Is that kind of what your folks are saying, Scott? Or
well, yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously what we're hoping for. But to be honest, and I've looked. There's other parts of the $3.5 trillion bill that aren't bad. They aren't necessarily. It's not full of just a bunch of bad ideas. I think what's probably likely to happen is in the next few weeks and in October, especially, is that they're going to probably try to come to an agreement on this $3.5 trillion deal and probably get it down. I think there's a Senator Manchin in West Virginia has indicated that he's not signing on to something that large. And there's another senator in Arizona that said the same thing.
Yeah, Sinema.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's going to be a chance for some compromise on the Democratic side of the aisle to figure out exactly what they're willing to accept at a much lower figure. And it's a matter, we're encouraging people to reach out to their representatives, to their senators in their districts, and say, hey, this part of the bill, while you're meant to kind of fund this bill through the wealthy and through the corporations, it's hitting me, the little guy, the average Joes, the average Janes in America with their retirement account, upsetting what they've planned their entire life. They've been investing in these private placements and real estate deals for years and growing their retirements and accounts. And all this is just going to upset the apple cart for them. And I think, again, it's an unintended consequence in the bill. I'm not sure the entire motivation behind it, but I do think it's one of those things, an unintended consequence. It maybe sounds good to somebody on paper, but when you look at the practical aspects and the effects it'll have, are just devastating for some people.
Most of these congresspersons don't even read the bills they're voting on. It's a little absurd, and then they're like, "Whoa, hey, was that in there really?" And it's kind of an embarrassment. But
I always wonder about that. They get these 2,000-page bills, and it's hard enough to read a 2,000-page book with a good story, but to read one of these bills,
yeah, usually being crammed through at the last minute. Anyway,
yeah, and like I said, that's why we're asking people. They're supposed to. I don't know how many of them do, but they're supposed to listen to their constituents. And I do think those people who are in districts where their next election may be in doubt, if there was a party change, and depending on what they do, upset, they're going to be responsive, I think, to criticisms in this bill and particular provisions. And I said, do encourage people to reach out, say no to 138312 and 138314. I think if enough people are heard on that, they'll realize two things. A, this has far-reaching effects that we had no idea about. And two, if we take out these provisions, all we're sacrificing is $1.8 billion in that bill. We're not, it's not someone's asking them to leave the corporate tax rate alone, which would probably be, $700 billion or close to $1 trillion. This is just a very small portion of it that, again, affects a lot of people.
Yep. No, absolutely. And it's just a situation where the moneyed interests get listened to first. And if you guys, our listeners, aren't making your voices heard and known by sending, comments, emails, whatnot, to your congresspeople, they don't know, because they don't read these bills for the most part. And also there are the lobbyists that are in there are pounding on them, and they don't think about the little guy. They're only thinking about the bigger picture of whoever the lobbyist is representing. So those are the loudest voices that get heard. So it's important when these things come out, we try to let you guys, our listeners, know that they're coming, and that gives you the opportunity to, if you're going to be affected by it or you don't agree with what's happening, is to send an email, send a letter, nice, be polite, but let them know. I mean, because many times they don't know because they're not paying attention, not really reading, and then they have these lobbyists that are in their ear chirping at them every day, 24/7, 365. So, Scott, really appreciate you coming on and explaining this to us, enlightening us, because as I said, I heard about it first on it was either your Facebook page or your LinkedIn page. And I was like, well, I didn't even know about that. And then I started looking around and saw other people chattering, and there seemed to be a lot of confusion about what it was and it wasn't. And you've really provided some clarity here. Stephen, anything else before we let Scott go?
No. So any other changes, Scott, that you think that might be coming in with IRAs?
Yeah, like I said, the only other provisions in the bill currently are just ones to address the value of the accounts. But these provisions on the self-directed and limitations really came out of nowhere. I mean, it's been talked about before about the valuations of IRAs and these incredibly large IRAs that Peter Thiel has, that Mitt Romney has, and the Google founders have. That's been in the press, but these particular provisions just came out of left field, and it's caught our industry certainly by surprise because it's never been talked about before. So I really appreciate you all having me on to help spread the word about this and get people informed. And yeah, just reach out to those Congress people, and they have advisors and aides on staff that are taking notes and taking your calls and feeding that information back.
And as a reminder to our listeners, you can invest in real estate in an IRA. That's still not changing. It's a very specific channel, but that's being affected by this. So, but Scott, if someone's interested in learning more about using their IRA, their retirement accounts to invest in real estate directly, how would they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can give me a call. My direct line is 727-581-9853, and my extension is 1123. And you can certainly visit our website at Advanta, Advanta IRA.com.
Scott, thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, gentlemen.
And that was Scott Maurer from Advanta IRA. Stephen, another change coming out of D.C. that we feel like we need to stop the press to let people know what's going on. It's not happened yet, but it's being discussed, and our listeners can react accordingly to their leaders in D.C., the representatives in D.C., to voice their opinion one way or another. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it was very important because it gets confusing out there. Different news outlets pick up different parts, and there's chatter, and it gets to be confusing. The fact is that investors can still use their IRA to invest. It's just a certain channel in the IRAs that could be at risk. Still important, and we should still object, but it doesn't apply to everything.
Yeah, we've had some of our guests that have been on the show actually do these syndications and debt, and will do lending to fix and flippers and earn a return on that. And these guys are definitely being affected. And if you've raised money from friends and family on a small raise to do the same thing to lend back out into the real estate community, it's going to be affected. So this is your opportunity, and it is pretty serious. I mean, you guys can make a difference by communicating effectively with your representatives and just lay out your case. It's funny because people will copy us on some of this correspondence after we've discussed about a tax item coming out of D.C. or something that's happened in the state of Florida, and they'll copy me on it, and they'll say the craziest things. You're like, you don't need to say anything crazy. Just the more rational you are, the more apt they are to listen to you, and just lay out your case. And they might not have heard it because they're folks that are paid a lot of money to be in the ears of Congress people 24/7, 365. So, this is an opportunity now for you to just send it a quick email or letter and let them know that you're a constituent and what your opinion is. Stephen, anything else before we let our good listeners go?
Yes, there is one important thing. The place to go and get more information on real estate and investing in Florida is www.investfloridashow.com. Download the app and listen while you're mobile.
Guys, as always, we appreciate the time that you invest with us each and every episode. And until next time, Hasta la vista.
You've just listened to the Invest Florida podcast with Eric Odum and Steven Silverman. Join us every week for actionable real estate investment ideas, and of course, visit our website at www.investfloridashow.com for more shows and tips on how to earn a cash flow in the real estate market in Florida. While hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show have no reason to doubt the validity of comments of our guests, we do not warranty their accuracy. Please check with your legal, financial, and tax advisors before entering into any investment. Returns will vary from person to person and deal to deal based on unique circumstances. All information expressed in this show is for educational purposes only. Opinions of the guests are not necessarily shared by the hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show.